Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pragyan 21, the Metaverse, powered by Autodesk and co-sponsored by Times Now. We sure hope you're feeling crafty today, as we have among us an amazing artist. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. Noticeboard, our online career news partner, College Search, the Kowai Post, and Alltop 9, our online media partners, Startup News, our social media partner, and Blogadda, our blogger outreach partner. Our guest today is a painter, sculptor, and an accomplished physicist. He's known for channeling his inner scientist into the works of art he creates. Combining the latest technology with his creativity, he's created a unique way of sculpting, which shows in his amazing works like the Foamball and Elective Affinities. Without further ado, let me introduce to you Julian Voss. Hey Julian,
Hi,
how are you doing?
hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. Okay, so we have we have sort of arranged for a virtual exhibition, and we'll be playing some of your videos of some of your works, and then we'll go on to ask some questions which can hopefully clear us.
Sure, great.
Sounds good? Yeah.
Sounds
Okay.
perfect. That's a very different piece. The other one was called Spannungsfeld, which means tension field, literally translate. This one's called Samantha in the Meadows. She is a space-filling irregular tetrahedra, that's essentially the structure. That one is, instead of space-filling tetrahedras, that's just the skin, the triangle skin, basically, but essentially the same thing, only 2D instead of 3D, essentially, because it's surface. It's fake glass. People are talking pretty loud in the gallery there.
Yeah.
That one's called Elective Affinities, after the Goethe, the German writer Goethe's famous work, Wahlverwandtschaften. Not sure it's famous in India, probably not. Mostly in Germany, I guess. What? Yeah, that's one version of the foam ball.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, these are some really fantastic artworks, but like there's a lot of technology that you use in making these pieces here. So can you just elaborate about them, like
Okay.
foam ball or yeah.
Okay, so the foam ball is a bit of an oddball in there in this mix. So the foam ball was designed using software called Surface Evolver, which was designed by a mathematician in the US, in a college in the US, and his name is Ken Brackey. And he also wrote the script to create that foam ball, actually. So it's essentially using minimizing energy, minimizing surfaces for a three-dimensional foam object. So you basically, yeah, it's basically, you have polyhedra that are squished together, and they have in between what's called the plateau borders. In this case, they're modeled as if they were liquids, like a real foam, like a froth.
And like how do you go about making that? Like it's unimaginable. It's not imaginable, like, to make such a piece, right? Like if you look at it, you can't really tell how would someone do it.
Well, I mean, there's two aspects to it. One is the computational side. So that involves, like, on Ken Brackey's part, 15 years of his time spending his life making the software called Surface Evolver, which is used by the foam community so they can do things like this. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you need the development of 3D printing and vacuum casting, which was needed for this piece of this size in order to pull this off in metal in one piece. And then the rest is craft, it needs to be polished and all that good stuff. And for me, it's a side chain of this old interest in foam structure, which actually was developed by the triangular pieces. In an early time, I asked myself, what is a natural way to connect dots in space? And in 2007 or so, I had this idea that, oh, of course, that's a foam structure. And one spin-off, by the way, I can show you, is my window screens. Those are my window screens. Instead of prison bars, I decided to design, using the same software, a two-dimensional foam, which is much easier than 3D, and cut that out of steel and use it as my security screens for my windows.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, so obviously you did explain all of the videos, like why are the models named so, and what was the inspiration behind them. But why do you choose those specific kind of shapes or models? Like apart from the foam ball, it's all
humans.
It's all humanoids, yeah. So
yeah, I mean, I've always been mostly intrigued by other humans. Science is interesting, but I mean, there's this one giant kind of craziness about science as we know it since the, let's say, 15th or so century, that we pretend we can take the observer out of the equation. I mean, pretend that we can observe reality as something out there independent of us, which turned out, since we know in quantum physics, that's actually not true, but we still pretend in our worldview, in our paradigm, that this is the case. So on that level, I feel it's critical to have the person in there. And if you look in the history of art, for 30, maybe 40, probably even a little bit longer than that, 1,000 years, 40,000 years ago, we made art, and only in the 1920s, we thought, oh, somehow it's not a good thing to have the human in there. This was always representational. We did the Venus of Willendorf. We have made human maps of human beings for like 10,000 of years, and only like in modernism we started doing this abstract thing. So it's and push the body out of the art. So it's I think what we have been seeing the last decade or so is a renaissance of allowing beauty and the human body go back into art. And for me, it's exciting because I relate on a very deep body level with another body in space.
That's very interesting, especially like with modern art. It's all become kind of distant, the human element in art. So
right.
I feel you. All right, so the sculptures that you make, that like they've evolved over time. So you started out with proteins, and then you moved on to tetrahedrons, and now these famous
tetrahedra came later, actually, because they were too complicated. I started with triangles and tried to make tetrahedras, but it was too hard, and now I pulled it off.
And now you've moved on to some disappearing statues. So what was the evolution process like? Can you tell some of your thoughts as they progressed?
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's sort of at the same time. So I started with these protein structures in 2001, and I was intrigued by the idea that I could use mitered cuts. So I take a one-dimensional piece of lumber or steel and cut it into mitered cuts and reassemble it without losing any material into a three-dimensional thing. Three-dimensional as in occupying all three dimensions equally and not just one mostly, like a long piece of lumber.
Yeah.
And so, but only in 2006, I made my first sliced piece, which was inspired directly by my research in physics, where basically I had asked myself the question, what would it feel like to be the quantum object that goes, say, through a double slit experiment? So you're probably familiar with a double slit experiment. You send a photon, for example, an electron or an atom, through two openings as a wave entity that is not being observed. And while it's not being observed and doesn't leak information to the environment, it is able to interfere with itself when you then hit it at its and makes interference pattern with itself. And so when I was in physics in 1999, we did an experiment using the biggest ever balls, molecules, to do that same thing. So we showed for buckyballs, carbon-60 molecules, that they also show wave behavior. And so I asked myself, what would it feel like to be that buckyball, to be that entity that goes through a double slit? And I came up with this image of a walking man, mathematically seen as a bunch of wave fronts perpendicular to the direction of motion. I go this way, the wave fronts go that way. That's the quantum mechanical description of a moving thing through space. And so I made this walking guy out of slices. And only after I had done it, I felt, oh, wow, that's so cool. He disappears from one, because they're all parallel. There's 10% steel on this side. Everything else is the air behind it. And from that side, it looks solid from every other angle. And so, and that kind of, and then I started using that idea and got better at the technique and started going away from that very literal physics interpretation towards a more broad interpretation of using the gaze. When a person looks into your eyes at this very special angle, I use that angle as the disappearing angle mostly.
Wow, that's an interesting story. So, what kind of time frames do you work on a regular art piece? Like, on average, how much time do you spend on one? And do you have like a team supporting you, or?
Oh yeah, I have a really amazing team. We're like 8 people total here, and most people are welders and metal fabricators. I do most of the design work. I have one person who kind of runs the whole shop. So it's kind of a pretty big symbiosis situation. And time scale is getting faster. We know now more what we're doing. We dialed in the routine stuff. So worst case, I would say 3 years from conception to installation. Fastest case, 3 months of a substantial piece.
I'm sorry, we lost connection to you for a brief moment. So
Okay.
could you go over that once again? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was talking about my team. So we're a total of 8 people here. Most of us are metal fabricators. I sit most of the time on the computer, do the design work, and then there's one person, Darren, who like runs the shop basically and is kind of the interface. So he does also some design work and the metal work and make sure everything is like smooth. And so in terms of timeline, I said for a like substantial public commission, it goes between 3 months and 3 years in the worst case. It tends to get faster because we get better at stuff.
Yeah. So as you do more, you get efficient. So yeah.
Yeah,
Obviously.
So we can experiment with new things, but we know even that experimentation is a little bit more predictable these days.
So obviously you must have a lot of fresh ideas as well. Obviously you wouldn't reveal them.
I do not follow up with them enough. I have like a bunch of ideas, and since I'm so busy, it's very difficult to keep that time and space to follow up with new ideas. But I actually wish I would do it more. But there's some, yeah.
All right. Okay. So let's move on. What would you say is the role of technology in today's art? Like people see art and science as two different things. Obviously, in like the very early days, we've had helicopters or initial primitive designs of airplanes designed by famous artists as well. So like people that sort of thing has faded over the years. Art and science are now completely two different things, but obviously you're combining the two fields. So what's your thoughts on the subject?
There's so many different things. I mean, one aspect that popped in my mind when you spoke was that I think there has always been much more than we think a influence from the sciences and the innovation technology towards the art. Like, for example, if you take Fauvism and Impressionism in painting, that didn't come out of thin air. That came because new pigments were invented. And today it's in sculpture, especially, it's completely obvious. It's basically a new day in sculpture. We have 3D scanning, we have 3D printing. It's just a matter of time that we can 3D print in metal in a life-size scale for the amount of money that's comparable with traditional casting. No, we're not quite there yet, but it's totally changing. It's like everything is changing, especially in sculpture. In painting, I'm not really sure how much it changes. You still have to paint. It's it's still a craft that's done mostly with your hand rather than on the computer and able to be digitized. Then I mean, you say they're more and more separate. I guess I see what you mean, but they're so intricately interwoven to me. It's just like, I think the problem is that we don't understand and see how they're interwoven. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that paradigm of, there's this reality out there, this complete internalization of the Cartesian Newtonian worldview. And we're kind of complete slaves to that. Haven't really learned anything from quantum mechanics yet in terms of our worldview. So that's about to come, I think. So I think we're completely actually, addicted to that paradigm without even noticing it.
And would you say art has the same effect on science? Like you did say about science having an effect on art, making it more creative, having lots of possibilities to do art with. But what effect does art have on science?
I mean, there's these famous or not so famous examples. I mean, one is the buckyball structure, for example. I mentioned the buckyball carbon-60 molecule. That was the guys who discovered that structure in the mid-'80s. They had that insight after thinking about Buckminster Fuller's geodesic domes, which is the same underlying structural kind of like algorithm. I don't think there's a whole lot of examples. There's a few, and they tend to be held up. But science is a huge industry. It's funded because people will get money out of it eventually. Art is not like this. Art is kind of a step kit of society in a way. Because people are passionate about it to do it, but there's no serious funding, and has not put the same trust by society into it. It's just something that rolls because it's so important to humans, and it's critical somehow, but it's hard to point your finger at it and hard to say, that's how we make money eventually off it.
So talking about like the commercialization, like do you think all these when you commercialize art, like there's a lot of loss to it, or it's just the same art, commercialized or not commercialized.
That's a tricky one. I mean, I think there is a corrosive
Yeah.
effect of money in general. You see it in families, you
Yeah.
see it with everything that's for sale. It's at some point it's for sale. And when I was actually a young
Yeah.
painter, I would refuse to sell a painting, even though I was asked. I would like maybe trade it, but I would say, oh no, it can't be tainted with money. I don't see it that way anymore. I want to have fun and build my studio. I need to run this big studio, which is a lot of money every month. So I need to make money. So I decided to have a very different outlook. For me, it's about connecting to the audience, and I try not to be. It's a matter of fact of life. It's money. So I think if you keep it at that cool level and don't get too excited about money, then I think it's okay. But yeah, it's just like unavoidable.
Yeah, I mean, the money is that sort of a thing. So yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about that, so you said you had an initial approach that you wouldn't sell your art, but now you do because you have to earn a living. Talking about that, so do you need like specific breaks or something, like you're completely done thinking about something and then you need some creative break
Yeah.
and you can come back to creating more art, or do you just keep working?
I would do
all the
that
time?
if I could, but the thing is that wouldn't be healthy for me. So I put myself into a situation where I have 4 kids and they have all, very strong needs, and I'm a very much family-oriented person. So the fact is that my family takes up so much of my mental energy and my space and also time that I have those breaks automatically. So when I get here in the morning at 8, I'm fully focused on the work till basically 4 o'clock. So I have this right now. I have a really nice way of kind of like being very intense in work, but then doing other stuff because I have to and because I want to. So that's breakdown. It's like when you exercise and you do like arms and then you do legs again. So both is
Yeah.
exhausting, but
Yeah.
you can recover that way.
Yeah. So I have one of my favorite pieces was Elective Affinities. Like, you did briefly go over the inspiration behind it, but I'd like to hear some more about it.
Yeah, I mean, what basically motivated me to do a piece like this is this quantum style I was mentioning before with the walking man and the other pieces
Yeah.
is kind of an ideal metaphor. It's I think of it as like a Bose-Einstein condensate. You have a single atom and you think of it as one entity, but then there's this miraculous thing that if you cool them down enough, and they're bosons, then they become one, literally. They become indistinguishable, single, coherent quantum objects. And I believe in my worldview that we as humans, as individuals, we are so ingrained into that view that we are one, we are me, me, and you are you. But I think this is ultimately not actually how it is. I think ultimately there's an underlying oneness, and you see it in all the major religions, and I would like to get to that, how we are ultimately really more one than individuals, that the individual is more like a meta level, a facet, if you will, of something underlying. So the underlying, metaphorically for me, would be that construct out of these 2 people that sort of merge together. And I've made a piece that we just installed a month ago in Columbus, Ohio, where we took actually 5 grown-ups, a kid and a chicken, and turned them into one group where the faces, the heads are individuals and they have racial, facial features.
Yeah.
You can recognize them even, but they are one thing. And if you look through them, they just become this one Bose-Einstein condensate, if you will.
Okay, so I'll definitely have to look that up. We'll even throw it in if we can find a
Do that.
video.
It's called our Single Garment of Destiny, based on the title is of a Martin Luther King quote.
All right, so I'll definitely throw that in. Okay, thank you, Julian, for showing off these amazing art pieces and answering all our questions. Yeah, so these were some truly groundbreaking concepts, and it was amazing interacting with you. Okay, guys, we've come to the end of the showcase, and we'll be seeing you around for our other amazing events. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.